afternoon, I'm Robert Vogel with Issues in Education, and we're at the International Society for Technology and Education Conference in Chicago. And this afternoon we're speaking with Brandon Olszewski, Director of Research for ISTE. And Brandon, welcome to the program today.
Thank you, Robert.
Yeah, you bet. We know that you have certain expertise, some of which includes social science methodology and program evaluation. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that is exactly, and what do you do on a day-to-day basis for ISTE?
Kind of depends on the day.
Okay.
This week I spent some time coding up logistic regression models.
Oh my.
And on exploring confidence intervals and p-values. And on other days I do some survey jockey work, try and keep up with people who are submitting data that help us understand what parts of our programs are effective, what parts aren't, how we can use that information to inform program design and implementation.
Okay, and then how does all of that information get disseminated out into the marketplace, and does it go through some kind of a process before it gets out for review or implementation? How does that work exactly?
Yeah, a handful of ways. At times, some of that information goes out in the form of results and maybe programs in reports to program funders. Mm-hmm. It might go out ultimately in the case of maybe like helping us redesign programs that they're more effective for audiences. I work with a loose team of consultants that help bounce ideas around in terms of methods we use to investigate these kinds of questions that we have around effective use of ed tech and new pedagogies and things like that. Okay. So I have a team to lean on, but day in and day out, I'm kind of the data guru at ISTE.
So how much of what you do is proactive or upfront to help create the programs versus tweak the programs on the back end?
Yeah, great question. Kind of about a third, 2/3, not quite half and half. So going into it, for instance, oftentimes the question will pop up, especially from ISTE leadership, what does the research say about fill in the blank? Mm-hmm. And so I go hunting for 4 hours, try and find out who's been doing some work in this area. Mm-hmm. And then we use that information to try and figure out, hey, what do we know about best practices in the field and topics like mobile learning, AI in education, whatever, and we use that information to design our programs. And then on the back end, most of my hours are spent, kind of keeping track of like, hey, what kind of information can we extract from participants to understand like what's working for them, what's not, where did we hit the nail on the head, where did we miss, things like that.
Okay, so then do you also benchmark certain programs that move out from ISTE, and if so, are you benchmarking schools, are you benchmarking districts, teachers, programs? How does that happen?
Yeah. Most of the time, we try and stay away from hard kind of comparative models around, you all are doing this well versus this group. Most, in part because schools and districts are all different, and when we use, for instance, if you've read The End of Average by Todd Rose, taking the heights of everybody here at the ISTE conference and determining whether that means I'm short, tall, big, little, it's actually not super helpful. So we try and stay away from that kind of big, grand, summative kind of comparison model. What we do, though, is try and help a lot of our participants and the organizations that fund our programs understand how do people grow. That tends to usually be the kind of biggest driver. So we use longitudinal studies where we ask our participants before the program starts and once the program is done, or weeks after the program, how did this intervention affect you? How did it change teaching and learning in your classroom? Things like that.
Okay, and then to that end, how do you determine if what you do is successful? And if it is successful, then does it get broadened into something bigger? And if it's not successful, then do you backtrack and try to tweak it, or what do you do exactly with that?
Yeah, that's a question about scaling, right? So how do we build on what we learn and scale up, be able to deliver something we found helpful for our sample, our group, to a wider population, right? And that is arguably the most important chronic question in education research, because what works for one group, whether it's like about use of specific tools or professional development programs, may or may not work for other groups. And we definitely do our best to collect certain types of data that help inform that kind of iterative design of a program, as well as thinking through, what are the conditions, under what conditions would this kind of program or product or service be useful for other groups.
Okay, good. And how has your position as Director of Research, how has that evolved over the time that you've been there? I'm assuming you don't do the same thing month after month, week after week, so you must be changing and taking on new things as you go through the process throughout each year, right?
I wouldn't want to go through the interview not crediting our chief, Richard Collada. So Richard Collada and Joseph South have really done a nice job pushing ISTE into new directions. So examples would be like a really strong focus on equity, artificial intelligence and its impact on education in the workforce, et cetera, right? So maybe 5 years ago, I was definitely doing more kind of traditional program evaluations for different clients, and now in this year, for instance, we're branching out into new fields such as ed tech in the world of adult education, which if you want to talk about equity, are consistently underserved. We just got a great grant to do a lot of work in learning sciences, which is understanding the kind of the principles of how the brain works and applying those to classroom teaching. So in general, let's move from kind of a traditional kind of just focused on ed tech model to let's think about that whole student, let's think about that whole ecosystem when we're talking about driving educational change and transformation.
Okay, good. So then are there some specific takeaways that attendees here at the conference might see as a result of the work that you do day in and day out? I guess it affects all of the programs to some degree, right?
You know, just down there at the ISTE Central stage, folks can go down there and learn about the artificial intelligence and education course that we just finished up.
Good.
We tweaked several elements of that course based on the evaluation data that I provided, that I managed for that original pilot project, which was funded by General Motors. So I guess I kind of think of myself as good tech support. Like nobody thanks the tech director when the computer works.
Yeah, right, exactly.
You know, but I will hear about it if my evaluation was lousy. So I'm not going to say it's a thankless job, but it's definitely the nature of the work.
Okay, good. So for those who are watching on Issues in Education today, how would they get in touch with you and how might they find out more about what it is that you do day in and day out?
Email would be the easiest way, brandon@iste.org. Olszewski is really hard to spell, so I didn't want that in my email address. Additionally, there are some artifacts up on the ISTE site where they can, for instance, there's a great literature review I did as part of that AI in Education course. We're going to be putting out some resources like that for our adult education program and how we're bringing technology to that sphere. So they'll see the impact of my work there, but email would be a fine way, and they can find me on the ISTE website.
Okay, that's great. Well, thank you. Well, we've been speaking with Brandon Olszewski, Director of Research for ISTE, the International Society for Technology and Education, and we want to thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you, Robert.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay.
Is there anything that we should have talked about that we didn't talk about, or anything that...
I had to think about that, but how would people know that I did anything? I rarely get the credit for, I mean, nobody cares, you know, nobody wants to hear about p-values, but you know, so I had to think about that one.
Yeah.
That covers it.
Yeah, well, I kind of went with the flow and tried to ask questions that I thought would tee up for you, and occasionally you get one that maybe you don't get before, but...
It's like